Biggest thing that I would want to say to anybody who is listening, and especially if you're listening because you want to understand more about yourself and potentially think you want to seek out a diagnosis for something that's been bothering you for a long time, do it, because they say knowing is half the battle. I disagree. I think knowing is 90% of the battle.
Well, those were some words of wisdom from today's guests on Silent Superheroes. My name's James. I'm sat here actually about 9 minutes before we start the recording. And it's let's generously call it a summer's day here in Seattle where I'm recording. And today's guests are Wesley and Dillon. I met them both when they were kind of a warm-up act for a talk I was giving for an event called Mental Health Out of the Shadows. That was an event hosted by HR Transform and ResponsiveX, and it dealt with the topic of mental health. And Wesley and Dillon's contribution was one of their songs, they're musicians, and they rap about their experiences with mental health. And it was a powerful, powerful thing to lead off an event with. And I happened to come right after them, which is why I say they were an inadvertent warm-up act. And I was blown away. I thought they were amazing. So I invited them on the show. Both of them deal with different mental health conditions, which we'll find out about. And I was curious about a few things. I think first, they come at mental health from a different place. Their experience of growing up, getting diagnosed, were really quite different. I think quite interesting to hear those different perspectives. I'm fascinated by how these two people came together. Like, how did they connect and meet and end up making music together? Which is kind of a cool story. And then finally, the role of music in their journey with mental health. How does it contribute to help give them perspective? How does it help them process the feelings and the experience of living with a mental health condition? I'm excited to get started with today's recording. Before we start, remember that neither Dillon, Wesley, or I are medical professionals, so anything we say should be checked against a reliable source. But other than that, my name's James Pratt. I'm the host of Silent Superheroes, and I'm really glad that you're here.
Welcome to the Silent Superheroes Podcast, a series of frank conversations about mental health at work.
All right, welcome to Silent Superheroes. I'm here with two guests today, Wesley and Dillon. Wesley and Dillon, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
And we've got two people today because you are two halves of a musical combo, musical outfit. I don't know what the right group. It's probably a better words. And I met you both. Originally, you were performing at a mental health conference that I was speaking at. I loved your performance and wanted to talk to you more about what you do. And so both of you, some of your music is inspired by mental health, and both of you deal with mental illnesses. So, let's go Dillon first. Why don't you just briefly introduce yourself and explain what it is that you manage?
My name is Dillon Wright. Wesley and I are both located in the Bay Area. I work for a nonprofit, and I have dysthymia, which is persistent depression, and a general anxiety disorder.
And for someone who's not familiar with it, you mentioned dysthymia is kind of persistent, low-level depression. Can you give a sense of like what that feels like on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, definitely. In the past, I've dealt with a lot of, I think, what people consider to be more sad, dark thoughts and kind of spiraling into some suicidal thoughts. But I've gone to a few years of therapy, so I'm able to manage that level. So currently my persistent depression is more emotional, and I'm extremely sensitive. And that doesn't always mean I'm sad. I can cry at happy thoughts too, or get a text from a friend like, how are you? And kind of start to break down. Just, I would say sensitive is the best way to describe it.
And that's a lovely clarification that it doesn't have to be something bad that makes you cry necessarily. And then briefly, generalized anxiety disorder. what's your best way of describing that?
I don't know how to describe it as well. I think for me, it's just it's hard for me to change my focus to other things. So in terms of work, I can just get extremely focused on work, and that can be on my mind, 24 hours a day. And it can be really hard for me to separate myself from those thoughts and the emotions and the stress that I feel from it.
Yeah. So very attached to specific thoughts, areas of focus. Cool. So let's turn our attention to Wesley. Wesley, what is it that you're managing and dealing with?
My name is Wesley Andrew. I currently am a student at Foothill College in Los Altos, although I live in Redwood City. And I currently am diagnosed with bipolar 1, generalized anxiety disorder, ADHD, which I know is a mouthful, but
like a collection, like you're collecting Pokemon or something.
I'm
like
just
that, right?
trying to get all the badges,
So can you briefly explain what each of those things are, as far as you understand them?
I will start with ADHD because that's the one that I got diagnosed with first. And that's pretty simple. It's just, I really, if I don't want to do something, I have a really hard time focusing on it. And I have a really hard time. It honestly kind of works with my anxiety a lot because I get really anxious about starting things and then I can't get started. And even like while I'm working, I'm working on writing a book and I have to stop every 15 minutes to go do something because I can't stay focused for longer than that. But conversely, if I'm really excited about something, I'm really focused on it. It's kind of, there's a double-edged sword. There's some good parts to it.
Yeah. I think people get that wrong a lot about ADHD.
Yeah. So it's not all bad. And I already kind of mentioned the anxiety, but I also it kind of cripples me and makes me not start things is the biggest thing. I have a hard time getting things started. I'm trying to get a job right now. And while I'm trying to train for it, it's a lifeguarding position. So as I'm training for it, I have a hard time going to the pool because I'm afraid that I'm not going to swim fast enough. So there's that. I have bipolar 1, which means full mania and full depression. And it's an extremely complicated illness, but the best way I can describe it is two, polar opposite moods. I know it's in the name, but one is depression, which Dillon mentioned, and mine's major depression. So it's not constant, but it's more. I don't want to it's more intense when it happens. And then there's mania, which is a euphoric or irritable mood that lasts for weeks or months on end.
So, I don't know who wants to go first, or you're going to interleave, or how we'll do it. But let's talk a little bit about the history of these two young men and kind of your journeys through life, and to get to the point where somebody said, "Hey, you have this condition." And whoever wants to start, feel free to start.
So Wesley and I have very different journeys when it comes to finding a diagnosis for our mental health. Growing up, I would say I went through a fair share of trauma in my childhood, and I think I just accepted my mental health condition, which I didn't consider to be a mental health condition, just my normal. This is just normally how things are.
What does trauma mean to you? You don't have to be specific if you don't want to, but what does that word mean in your mind?
Yeah. So for me, trauma, I think there's a few areas from my childhood in terms of I had quite a few sudden deaths in my family. Everyone, my uncle, my grandmother, and my grandfather all passed away overnight, essentially. So none of them were expected. They were all very sudden, and they were all very close relationships to me. And as well, some of my trauma comes from pretty consistent abuse I went through my adolescence. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. So you had this history of trauma in your family that led you to kind of, it sounded like a set of feelings that you were having. And where did you go from there?
Yeah, from there, I think I just went on with my life. And, if I had to cry, I'd cry in my room. And if, there was times where I wasn't able to, muster up the strength on my own to, go to school, I just didn't go. And I kind of just processed it as my own personal weaknesses that I had internally. I didn't really get an awareness of my mental health until I started dating, and I had a long-term relationship for about 2.5 years. I remember this moment where my girlfriend was crying and she was sharing, like, you don't see how much you not dealing with your mental health like affects you, and like that's the hardest part about dating you. And I remember after we broke up, I feel like that still really stood out. Like I was like, wow, she felt a lot about that.
What was it that she was seeing that said like he's not dealing with his mental health?
That's a great question. I think in the moment I didn't know what she meant, but I think looking back on it, I can see some tendencies in terms of mood and being really dark and really down on myself, and constantly belittling myself or saying how terrible a person I am and how I wasn't good enough for her, and I wasn't smart and I was just doomed to be a failure. I think that would probably happen, every so often, every few months.
So she gave you some feedback. It was like, hey, you're kind of hurting that you don't deal with your mental health. How did that lead you to kind of go talk to somebody and find out, oh, that's dysthymia?
I ended up having a really hard time my first semester as I transferred to Menlo College, and I essentially was sick for like 3 months, and I went to a doctor, and they said, oh, like your body's attacking yourself, like you're so stressed. Yeah, in bed essentially for about 2 months with double ear infection, eye infection, throat infection, just everything. And I lost like the ability to like talk for a few days because my vocal cords. I lost the ability to hear for about a day, about 12 hours. And I went on a few rounds of like antibiotics. And when the doctor told me this, yeah, go ahead.
Your body was really trying to give you a message.
It really was. And I was like, wow. Like, and then when the doctor told me I was stressed and that's what was causing it, I was shocked, and I was like, wow, I have a problem. And so I sought therapy at my university. I went and spoke with a professor, told her what I was going through. She pointed me to free services that we had on campus. And I attended therapy for about 2.5 years to really be able to kind of work through those things and be able to talk through some of that past trauma and to get a diagnosis.
Maybe we'll come back to kind of the next step in that story in a second, but I don't want to leave Wesley out of this whole thing. So let's talk about your journey and like compare and contrast yours to Dillon's.
Yeah, so I'll say, first of all, growing up, I was always considering myself to be someone who's happy, someone who's joyful, who generally is a class clown, who doesn't really get down about very much. Because of this, in middle school, not because of it, but in addition to this, in middle school, I watched a YouTuber who had a funny little video, said, here's how you can tell if you have ADHD. It was just a YouTube video, 7th grade. So I watched it and I was like, wow, I have every single one of those symptoms. So I went to my parents and said, hey, I watched this YouTube video. And this guy said, here's how you know if you have ADHD. And I was everything. And so my parents like laughed at me and they said, you don't know. No. So like, oh, okay.
Was that like a sort of, I would say, legit video? Like it was somebody seriously saying, here's how to know? Or was it kind of a joke thing? Like, ha, ha, ha. Yeah,
it was more of a joke. Although looking back on it, he was not wrong about those symptoms. Like, if you're like a 10-year-old, then like you have all those symptoms. But, I was like 12 at the time, so a little older than that. But I kind of persisted, like, hey, I think I have ADHD. I can't focus in class. I'm starting to get bad grades. And I did start getting bad grades. So finally, halfway through freshman year in college, in high school, my mom finally took me to the doctor. We sat down and I took the little test, and there's like 50 questions. And I checked the boxes for having ADHD on 46 of them. So they
So you aced the test.
I aced the test. That was the first test in years that I did well on. Yeah. So then they diagnosed me with ADHD combined type. So both the inattentive and hyperactive. That was the first step of my mental health journey. Should I keep going or?
Well, so it sounds like your parents were supportive of.
They were, yeah. They besides the initial kind of, which I can't blame them for because it's from a YouTube video, but yeah, they were generally a very good support system for me for throughout the entire process.
So, Wesley, you didn't stop at ADHD with your collection of.
Oh, I did not. If only. Yeah. So, about probably a year after that, I was really close to one of my friends. Her mom passed away very suddenly due to cancer, and I was particularly close because I had just seen her mom, and literally a month earlier. It hit me hard, and I was really sad. It was my brother's birthday, and I was not able to celebrate. I had to leave the restaurant and go cry. But then the feeling just stuck there, and it didn't leave for month after month after month. Spring rolled into summer, and everyone was telling me to be happy, and I wasn't. And I was friends with this another girl, and this girl had just been diagnosed with depression. And she said, I finally opened up to her and said, hey, I've been having these suicidal thoughts. I've been having this really hard time. And she said, you should go see a doctor. You might have depression. So I went to a doctor, got diagnosed with depression almost right away. And again, aced the test. It was weird because I never saw myself as a sad person. It was hard for me to wrap my head around hey, you have a mood disorder, because that didn't make sense to me because I was so happy. I was the guy that everyone look to be happy. So
I think in a minute we're going to come to why that is, but just note, listening to both of your stories, the importance of talking about it, right, with other people, going to talk about what's happening, or Dillon, in the case of your girlfriend, her being willing to talk about and say, hey, there's something going on. So I'm really glad that for both of you had that, those moments where you had somebody you could go to and say, this feels weird, what's going on. So then your journey, Wesley, keeps going, and I think eventually we learn why you're such a happy person and sometimes such a sad person.
Yeah, I'll jump right ahead to. I won't say every detail, but me and that girl, she and I fell off for a minute, and she got diagnosed with bipolar during this time, bipolar 1. The meds weren't working for me. I wasn't able to get happy. And there were a couple times that, looking back, I was manic and I didn't know it, and it caused problems. But finally, I went on and off ADHD treatment for years. Most of them didn't work, but I went on a medicine called Focalin. And Focalin, as with any ADHD stimulant, can cause mania. So I took the Focalin and immediately became psychotic and delusional and believed things that could not be true. And it also was extremely elated and happy when I was on the medication. But I assumed that because I was on a stimulant that you felt stimulated. I didn't realize that you weren't supposed to be that stimulated. So I went to my doctor and said, hey, it sounds similar to this mania thing that my friend's going through. And she said, yeah, it's not normal for a stimulant to do that to you. That only happens with bipolar people. Because of her, I got diagnosed with bipolar and depression, which depression didn't count, but
I think sometimes people are afraid of the word psychotic or psychosis for obvious reasons. It's not treated well in the media and TV and movies. I don't know if you could talk briefly about your experience of psychosis and sort of believing in things that weren't real.
So I've had both delusions and hallucinations. So my first delusion was believing that I had the soul of a demon, that I was a demon in a human form, and that somehow so that was bizarre. Quickly after that, I believed that I had taken a photo that was the best photo ever taken by any human on the planet. And it was worth $2.5 million. And that's how I knew that it was a delusion, because I knew the exact amount that it was worth. So
if it had just been the best photograph in the world, that wouldn't have been delusional. It's an illustration of that in and of itself is not dangerous, right? No. You're not a danger to other people because you believe you've taken the world's best photo. You're probably not a danger to other people if you believe you have kind of a demon in you. it is obviously sad. It's something that needs, help and, support, no doubt, but like you're not a danger, by default in that situation.
And then the other thing, which is also not dangerous, is like my hallucinations have been like, oh, I see lights in the sky, or I see the moon, I look away and the moon's gone, or I hear things for several days, but it's not inherently a dangerous thing. Like it's just things that affect me that are scary for me, because then they disappear. Like, oh my God, did I just see that? But they're never a danger to anyone else.
And I suppose the scary thing for other people is the what if, right? Well, if he can't see the moon and then sees the moon, like what might he do next, right? You're unpredictable. So I can see why people might feel that way, but I think it's important to recognize that, a lot of people who are in psychosis aren't actually dangerous. How did you come to know each other?
Yeah, I would say our relationship started off more of like a mentor-mentee relationship.
Yeah.
We go to the same church, and Wesley, I met Wesley
going into freshman year of high school.
Yeah, going into his freshman year of high school. So that's when we first met, and we were able to it was more so about, in a church setting, more so me inspiring him and building a relationship and kind of mentoring him towards his future, and helping him dress better, and just growing up and becoming more of a man. So I would say like that relationship, as he got older, formulated more into a deeper friendship, and I think we definitely became more equals in our relationship, where Wesley was drawing me out a lot more, and as he learned a lot more about his mental health especially, I feel like he taught me a lot, and he really helped me understand his own disorder, and then really advocated for me to gain more knowledge into mine and really dig deeper.
That's great. I'm wondering about where music came into both of your lives and how you kind of came to ultimately make music.
So I played the saxophone from 5th grade until 11th grade, 6 years. So music, and I loved music growing up. I would sing in the car all the time. I grew up on like reggae and alternative rock. So music's always been a big part of my life, as with a lot of people that do music. So in high school, I got into hip hop and R&B, and I loved it from the start. And around probably junior year, I was kind of like, I want to make my own music now. I've been playing music for a while, but I wanted to make my own. So we had a studio at school that I went into and I messed around with, and that was I just messed around with it. We didn't record anything worthwhile. But then I'd known Dillon for a while, and he can tell me more about his story, but he was into it as well, into music and poetry. So I told him I want to make music, and we just borrowed a mic from somebody. We sat down, and he can go more over the stuff after that, but we just sat down. I had software on my laptop that I was already paying for, and we just hashed out a song. So I mean, he can tell you more about that, and I can tell you more about why I did it in a little bit, but yeah.
So Dillon, then, how did you come to music?
So for me, I never considered myself to be very musical. I wrote a lot of poetry, which I think was really tied to, the trauma and the depression and things that I was going through. So that was really always an outlet for me, was poetry. And later in high school, I had a few friends who were in bands. And so I had shown them some things I had written, and they were like, hey, can you write music for us? Can you write some songs? Then later in college, I had a friend who he freestyle rapped. So he would just play instrumental beats, and he was like, oh, you write poetry? Like, here, spit on this. Like, and I was like, I don't know how to do any of this. So at the time I didn't have a car, and he would give me rides, but the rule was that I had to freestyle rap if I wanted a ride.
That's a good friend. Saw something. It was like, I'm engineering a situation where you have to work on your gift.
So that's how music came to be for me in terms of being interested in it and really being able to put like lyrics and words to music. And then that's when I met Wesley. And Wesley was always a musician. And I really admired that about Wesley, that, you know, he was so passionate about music. And and then one day he was like, hey, let's record an album. And I don't know what mood state that was, but and I was like, what are you talking about? And he was like, let's record an album. And then I was like, what are you talking about? And you know, Wesley, being very euphoric, you know, said like, hey, you have a gift, I have a gift, like, let's do this, you know. Do you have anyone we could borrow equipment from? And I was like, yeah, my friend John, you know. And so I went and hit him up, and I was like, hey, can I borrow your mic for the weekend? And Wesley and I recorded some music, and I just hopped on the microphone and freestyled a little bit, and we found different beats and sampled some stuff. And and from there, I think we got a lot deeper in terms of our content later.
Talk about the role that music plays in understanding and dealing with your mental health.
I've been thinking about this a lot lately as I've been trying to understand how to build a brand for myself and my other creative passions. But I think the biggest thing for me was two things. One, first of all, just to say that I did it and just be like, hey, I can look back on this when I'm 40 and show my kids that, hey, your dad recorded a rap album and he did it like that. I just thought that was amazing. But two, the more deeper thing was it helps me personalize and understand, like, because when I write songs, for example, my song Depression 101, I didn't know what I was feeling when I wrote that song. I just knew I was feeling down. So over an hour and a half, I wrote out everything I was feeling, and it helped me understand, like, hey, this is what's going on inside me. So putting it to a beat and then just putting it out there, and the different ways you can inflect your voice and the different ways you use the flow and the way that the song sounds and the beat sounds, it really personalizes what you're feeling, and it feels great to get it out and let other people know this is how I'm feeling. So that's definitely how it is for me.
I would say for me, writing music helps me, similar to Wesley, really dive deeper into my emotions and really understand what I'm feeling, what I'm thinking. And as I've grown older, I think it really helps me share a story as to what I've been through. And I think I find a lot of peace in that. It's kind of like therapy in terms of like when you're able to talk about things for the first time with a therapist that you've held on to your entire life. But with music, it's a little bit different because it's a lot more emotional, and I can express myself in deeper ways through music. I would say I don't connect as much in music with the inflections of voice or anything like that. I think it's very more of a lyrical aspect for me. I think creatively being able to rhyme and do those is really, I find a lot of peace from it.
If you were to think about your body of music, what moment best reflects your conditions? That they kind of shine through the music, the beats, the lyrics.
For me, I already said Depression 101, I feel like is my best example of my mental health. It's the depression part, well, obviously. But yeah, everything about, I'm in love with that song. I think it really, the lyricism was on point. It was better than my Mood Swings series that I did on the album. I think everything about it was way deeper and way more unique in telling my story than anything else I'd ever written before.
I think for me, it would have to be maybe the song Reflections that I had on the album, that I was more so focused on kind of everything from adolescence to now and what I had been through with a level of like hope and vision moving forward. I feel like lyrically that it came to me very quickly. Like I think I wrote that song in about maybe like 8 minutes. maybe like 10 minutes or so. Like I think that's one of those moments where I was like, wow. And I read back the lyrics that I had wrote, and I was like, whoa, this is this expresses a lot, like I feel a lot about this. Like this really it was nostalgic for me as well. Like it really reminded me of childhood, which for me, thinking about my childhood is usually pretty dark.
If somebody's interest was piqued about your music, what's the name that you kind of recorded this album under, and what's the album called?
So my name on SoundCloud is Weslex, Weslex. His is MySYN, which is MySYN. And the name of the album is called A Really Bad Mixtape. So you can find that on SoundCloud or Loom, if that's a more obscure one. But
awesome, that's great. And I have listened to multiple tracks and I've enjoyed them greatly, especially Depression 101. It's funny that you would say that, but maybe you and I share the bipolar experience, and like there's something in there that resonates. So as I sit here looking at you both, you're both smiling and we're laughing and joking and all that stuff. Mental health is a journey. Sometimes we put on masks. I'm curious, how are you both doing?
Yeah, well, I mean, given that, we've been going through a pandemic and all the protests that have been going on, I definitely, I'm doing a lot better today than I was 2 weeks ago, where I definitely had probably a double depression, which, without getting super clinical, is just my persistent depression mixed with a major depression like episode. And so essentially I was just extremely emotional to the point of like not being able to control it. A few Saturdays ago, I was just kind of just cried all day, watched TV, and I had to really cut off my connection with social media and with like news outlets, and all the violence really just triggered a lot of past thoughts, and that mixed with Father's Day and my biological father, he was absent during my childhood, and all those things kind of just like mixed together to where I was just having a really hard time.
It's exhausting for people who have more normal mental health, right? I think even people I speak to who don't manage depression are like, wow, this is really, really kind of tough and hard to get through. And I think it's so much more difficult for people like you or me or Wesley who have the experience of and the being in depression. So I'm glad that you've kind of toughed through that. I mean, what helped you get back to feeling better again?
I think what helped me get back, get more in control of my emotions, I guess, and really be able to process and kind of feel was, which was the hardest thing, was advocating for myself, especially with my employer, and asking for a day off. And I had, especially in that depressive mindset, it was really hard to communicate, and took a drive out to the beach, ate lunch, and kind of just took a day to do nothing and kind of just recoup.
How supportive was the nonprofit that you work for?
Extremely supportive, which I was really nervous about, because it was a Saturday and I was like, can I have Monday off? And I added the caveat, like, if not, all good. Like, I'll be in the office on Monday if you need me. But just extremely supportive, and like, this is a really difficult time, and take the time you need, and like, you are number one. Like, your mental health and you taking care of you is what's most important. So
well done to that employer for being there. Wesley, how about you? You got the new diagnosis, but how's it going for you?
I am doing good right now. I'm euthymic, which for those listening is the state of normal mood, particularly in bipolar. It's used when you're not depressed nor manic. You're euthymic. So I'm about there, feeling pretty good. I was on a medicine called Latuda, or I am on a medicine called Latuda, that causes really bad like sleepiness. And so for months I was unable to get up before like 12 or 1, which was not fun because I like to get up on time to have more time in my day and get stuff done. And it makes me way happier to get up on time, like around 9 o'clock. So during my last episode, I grew tolerant to Latuda. At least that's what I think. So I'm waking up. I woke up at like 8:30, 9 o'clock today, and have been for the last like week and a half. And for some odd reason, I'm feeling better now than I've felt in months. The last time I was feeling this good was the first 3 months of the year, where everything just seemed to go my way. So there are a few caveats. Just this morning I got an email about that lifeguarding position, and I just am a little afraid that I'm not going to be able to pass the test for it. But other than that, man, I'm feeling great. Things are going well. Just went skimboarding yesterday at the beach, which was super fun.
I always like to do a little thought experiment. I think if we all look back on our journeys, maybe there was a moment where, we needed some guidance, a little pep talk, so I'm going to let you both kind of go back along your timeline and deliver a message to yourself at a point that's going to help.
Oh gosh. There's so many moments. Where would I go back? I would say my freshman year of high school was the toughest for me, where I was definitely going through suicidal thoughts. And that was probably like the darkest I've ever been like in my life. And I think I would go to that boy and just share hope and vision, and like things get better, and your current circumstances and the things you're going through aren't going to be here forever. And those things won't hold you back, because I think even to this day, I reflect and I feel behind all the time. I always feel like I'm inadequate and I'm behind my peers. And in reality, I'm not. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. And so I think that's the message I would give.
You know what's so great about asking that question? Everybody always takes it in the spirit that it's intended. And it occurs to me as you were talking, nobody's ever said, the Yankees win the World Series in like 2001 or something like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Which would be a totally valid response to the question. But, glad everyone takes it seriously. That's good.
Invest in Bitcoin.
Right? Start mining Bitcoin right now. Good stuff. Wesley, how about you?
It's a difficult question, but I think the best thing that I would say is shortly after my first big major depressive episode, my late sophomore year, I came into an era, like a short era of peace, where I just felt like, this is going to sound weird, but I wasn't afraid to die, like especially like to help someone or anything like that, because I'd been suicidal for so long that I valued my life at that point, but I wasn't afraid to die anymore, which was kind of a freeing, weird thing. I don't know. But at the same time, I felt like, hey, I know now I can get through anything. And I wish I would have known that back then, before, like, because I made mistakes when I was in that episode. So I think I would have just told myself, hey, you're going to be all right. Like, there's nothing can stop you once you've been through that dark of a place. Like, nothing can stop you anymore. So just get through this and you'll be unstoppable.
You're absolutely right that such strength comes from sort of being there. It's almost like going to hell, right? And it's like, I've come back and I know now that like I will be okay, because there's nothing that can be worse than that. So I very much agree. Coming up on our time here, what else would you both like to say about your illnesses, music, your journey, whatever it might be?
Biggest thing that I would want to say to anybody who is listening, and especially if you're listening because you want to understand more about yourself and potentially think you want to seek out a diagnosis for something that's been bothering you for a long time, do it. Because they say knowing is half the battle. I disagree. I think knowing is 90% of the battle. It's so, like, every time I've received a diagnosis, I've actually done it with a smile, because it's like, finally, there's other people are experiencing what I've experienced, and people understand it. And now I know I'm not crazy. I'm not suffering for no reason. I have a reason that I'm suffering, and that makes it that much more tolerable.
You're less alone.
You're less alone. Exactly.
It's a fundamental part of the human experience that we need other people. Your message is great. Like, reach out, talk to people, go get a diagnosis, and things can be better. How about you, Dillon?
Yeah, I mean, I think especially now with everything that's been going on, and I reflect back on my life, I think for people to not take one another for granted, don't make assumptions that you know somebody's life and understand what they're going through just because they're smiling and they're happy and they're the go-getter, but to really take the time to care about your friends and your loved ones, and to really ask them how they're doing, and to genuinely want to know what's really going on and what's deeper. Because as you mentioned about the mask, I think for me, it was really, really easy to just wear a mask and can still be something that I can lean on. Like, let me just throw on this mask. I feel terrible. I'm not happy about anything. I don't enjoy, this project or this assignment, but let me throw on this, happy face and be a go-getter and go do it. But internally, I'm crumbling or I'm extremely upset.
Dillon and Wesley, it was a real gift to run into you, as we did at that, Mental Health Out of the Shadows event. I'm really glad that we got connected. Glad that you brought some new music into my life. And I am grateful for the journeys you've both had. So thank you for making the time to come on the show.
Of course. Thank you so much, James.
Thanks for having us.
It's now several months since I recorded this conversation with Weslex and MySYN, aka Wesley and Dillon. With a few months of space, I've been able to hear the recording with fresh ears. When you meet Wesley and Dillon, it's obvious that they're good friends. What's not obvious, until you hear their story, is that they've taken very different paths to get where they are today. Wesley was the bright, happy child, full of fun, loved by everybody, whereas Dillon was more quiet and brooding. Wesley advocated for himself to get diagnosed with ADHD, whereas Dillon was nudged by a girlfriend. Wesley played music from 6th grade. Dillon had to be encouraged by a friend. Two different people, two different paths. Then, as the universe does, these two young men are brought together through their church and eventually through music. At this point in the journey, the differences melt away. Both believe that it's important to go consult a doctor and get diagnosed if you suspect you have a mental health condition. Both have learned the importance of having a good support system, for example, a supportive girlfriend or family or a bandmate. Both have learned to advocate for themselves in different ways. Wesley has pushed for diagnosis, and Dillon has learned to ask for time off when it's good for your mental health. We learned about a lot of conditions in this episode: ADHD, bipolar, generalized anxiety disorder, major depression, and dysthymia. That's a lot of conditions with a lot of symptoms and a lot of things that need to be managed differently. But if I learned anything from Wesley and Dillon, it's that we're more similar than different, and we move more easily in the world when we've got someone to talk to and someone who has our back. If you've enjoyed what you've heard in today's episode, you can leave a rating and review on iTunes or wherever it is you get your podcasts. If you want to hear about new episodes as they're released, you can follow us at facebook.com/silent superheroes or sign up for our newsletter at silentsuperheroes.com.
Take your mental health seriously. If you need to speak to someone, you can call 1-800-273-8255 or text crisistextline.org at 741-741. Both provide 24/7 confidential counseling to people in the United States. Worldwide, visit iasp.info/resources/crisis_centers/. To help others find the Silent Superheroes podcast, please leave a review on iTunes or your favorite podcasting service.